One of the favorite movies of my family is the quirky little fairy tale called The Princess Bride. There's so many interesting, funny characters and scenes in this. There's, of course, the dread pirate Roberts. There's the swashbuckling Inigo Montoya. There's Vizzini, the inconceivable Sicilian. There's Fezzik the Giant. There's Miracle Max, the Cliffs of Insanity. And who can forget the rodents of unusual size? I've been tempted sometimes to start a wedding ceremony like the impressive clergymen with marriage. But the three words, the line that's most repeated in my household from this movie are the words, "as you wish." In the opening of this movie, there's a young woman named Buttercup, and she has a farm hand named Wesley that she orders around very roughly. Farm boy, pick up that pitcher for me. Farm boy, take out the trash. Farm boy, please clear these dishes. And every time, before he fulfills her demand, he says, "as you wish." In fact, he says it so many times that she discovers, "as you wish," is his way of saying, "I love you." So my wife picked up on this. And so she, whenever there's a problem, calls out, "Farm boy!" And I always show up and say, "as you wish." As you wish, those three words are the heart of our relationship with Jesus. These are the words Jesus preached and prayed in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Lord's Prayer that we just said. These are the words that he prayed in the dark of the garden before they came, arrested him, and took him away. People who are deep in the Spirit say, "as you wish" is the core prayer. In fact, the only prayer we need to pray if we live it every day in our relationship with God. As you wish. That's the way to follow Jesus. Now, why is it we don't say these three words? Well, because of three little letters. E, G, O. John the Baptist, he understood what it meant to live a surrendered life. He said, Jesus must become greater. I must become less. But ego says the opposite. It says, I must be satisfied. I must be in the driver's seat. I must take charge. One of the symptoms of our egocentric culture is selfies. Do you know that they have determined that selfies can actually be bad for your health? Have you heard of tennis elbow? Well, now there's selfie wrist. In other words, if you hyperextend your wrist a lot, it starts to cause tingling in your hand, which is like carpal tunnel. Now, let's be clear. Ego is not bad. Ego is you. It's your core. It's yourself. It comes from the Greek word ego, which is their word for saying I. When ego gets in charge, though, when it gets in the driver's seat, it takes us to places and causes problems we didn't expect. And the interesting thing is that you don't need Expedia to take you on an ego trip. We create it in our own heads. We imagine achievements we'll get and victories we'll win and enemies and opponents we'll defeat. We criticize inside our neighbors, our friends, our family members while we sort of promote and lift ourselves up. We love it when people talk about us, and we worry what people are saying about us. We love adoration and praise and admiration and appreciation and affirmation. We want to, build a resume and leave a legacy and erect a monument that people remember after we're gone. Ego tells us we could never have enough. And that's why it's really hard to get off the ego trip and why it often causes problems to us and those around us. Pride is the gas that fuels this ride. Pride of all the sins is the worst one because it keeps pushing us to be in the center and driving us to do things we later regret. It was pride that made Adam and Eve reach for the fruit that would make them like God. It was pride that drove their son Cain to kill his brother Abel. It was pride that tempted King David to take another man's wife and to then murder him. Pride, C.S. Lewis says, has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. Pride divides families, it ruins companies, it divides churches, and it sends nations to war. And the thing about ego trips is that they eventually trip us up. That's what it says in Proverbs. If you set a trap for others, you'll get caught in it yourself. If you roll a boulder down on others, it will crush you instead. Let me share with you the textbook case in the Bible. His name is Haman. Haman is in the book of Esther, and his rising ego trip causes him to become the second most powerful person in the Persian Empire. From India all the way to Ethiopia, everybody parts like the Red Sea whenever he walks by. Every high and noble has to get down to the lowest level when he's around. Everybody does this except Mordecai. Mordecai is the leader of the Jewish community in Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire. And when Haman goes by and everyone grovels, he stands up, sits up, won't bow. And this infuriates Haman. Not satisfied to have 99.9999% of all the empire bow down to him, he has to do something against this one man. And not only get him, he signs and pays for the annihilation of all of Mordecai's people, all the Jews throughout the empire. Now, it's easy to sort of identify with heroic characters like Esther and Mordecai. For a minute, let's just tease out that little bit of Haman in our egos. Because if we don't, it may take us for a ride to places we don't want to go. So the first thing we've learned about Haman and our ego is this, that ego always wants more. It's like a bottomless pit. It's like a thirst never quenched. It's like a hunger never filled. Always looking to get more. Look at Haman. He is so powerful. He's got all this prestige. He's got all this position. He's got this wonderful control. And on top of that, he has signed the annihilation warrant of all of his enemies. And still, he's not satisfied. He says, calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had been elevated above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. If he can't have everything, he feels like nothing. With all those blessings, he's still miserable. You and I can sometimes be controlled by the myth of more. Like if a little bit is good, more is better. If this much feels good, more will be amazing. So we always want more. And it could be anything. Money, sex, food, weed, liquor, power, control, a applause, even more knickknacks. Just want more. But more is never enough. More never satisfies. Why? Well, two reasons. One is the law of diminishing returns, which tells us that the more you get, the less good it feels. So then what? You need even more to get the same feeling you've got. But then there's a second rule that works against that. It's the law I call of rolling circumstances, which tells us no matter how hard you try, you're probably not going to get more. It's like you have these circumstances that are going up and down, and when you have good circumstances come your way, you get a bumper crop of more, and it feels really good. But unfortunately, that often is followed by a dip, a drop, a circumstance that goes down, like the stock market, and suddenly you don't have more. And no matter how much you try, all the more dries up. So long as you let the circumstances take you for a ride, so long as you hold on to those circumstances, you're going to keep going up and down and never being satisfied, content, at peace. Last week, Linda talked about Super Bowl winning quarterback Jalen Hurts, right? Well, there were two other Super Bowl winning quarterbacks at the Super Bowl last week, and I was interested to listen to their comments. There's Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, right? And they both have won multiple Super Bowls. And Brady was the commentator. Mahomes played in the game, of course. And if you listened carefully, what you heard them say at separate times, pretty much the same thing. That the Super Bowl losses hurt much greater than the Super Bowl wins. And by the way, they were the two quarterbacks that lost to the Eagles. I don't know if you noticed that. You see, having all those Super Bowl wins didn't outweigh the losses. We never are satisfied with more. Compare that to what someone living in a dark, dank Roman prison cell, the lowest possible circumstance you could imagine, said. This is the Apostle Paul. He says, I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content. What? All the circumstances in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this. Why? Because he gives me strength. The way to get off the roller coaster of circumstances and the drive for more is to let Jesus be in the driver's seat, to say to him, as you wish. Now, fellow Hamans, I want to ask you this question. What's your more? What earthly thing do you feed your ego? Is it control, temptations, money, power, applause, praise? What circumstances control your emotions? Cause you excitement or depression, give you highs or lows? How can you get off the roller coaster? Let Jesus drive. Say to him, as you wish. Here's the second thing we learn from Haman, that ego often holds a grudge. Now, there's one little line that people often miss that comes when Haman walks onto the stage of the story. It says, his name is Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Who are the Agagites? Well, that was a king, King Agag. King Agag was king over the group called the Amalekites. The Amalekites. When the Israelites came from Egypt and were coming to the Promised Land, the Amalekites fought them, refused to let them in. And later on, during the time of Gideon the judge, the Amalekites again attacked the Israelites. Then when the Israelites got a king named Saul, son of Kish, he fought back against the Amalekites. He killed King Agag. He annihilated the Amalekites. So you can see there's a big feud going on between the Amalekites and the Israelites. Now comes Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, and he faces off against not just any Jewish person, it's Mordecai, the son of Kish, the son of Saul, an Israelite. So you can see there's a long-standing feud between these two. So when Mordecai stands up against Haman, it might not just be that he's obeying the Lord, it also might be because he has a long-standing grudge against Haman's people, just as Haman does against the Jews. Now, this is absolutely no justification for Haman's plan to annihilate the Jewish people, but you can see that there's a long-standing feud here, and it's caused lots of death and destruction. I don't know if you know this, but the three leaders of the nations that fought in World War I, Tsar Nicholas of Russia, George V of England, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, they were all cousins. Queen Victoria was their grandmother. And Kaiser Wilhelm has apparently said, if Grandma was still alive, we never would have fought each other. As it is, World War I caused 40 million casualties, including up to 22 million deaths, all for a family feud. Ego is driven by grudges, and grudges cause us to do and say things that are harmful to others and to us. If they get out, they burn bridges, sever relationships, fuel feuds, cause violence. If you keep it in, it disturbs your peace, affects your health, causes you to medicate. Haman, he was so angry about this feud. And so his wife Zeresh and his friends said to him, well, then have a pole set up reaching to a height of 75 feet and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he went to have the pole set up. It made him happy to think about putting up this pole for Mordecai. He thought that would take the pole that was impaling his soul, the grudge, out of his heart. So I want to ask you, friends, what grudge impales your ego? Now, I'm not saying you caused it or you're to blame for it, or that you're not right in feeling that way. But what I want to ask you to say is it helping you to have that grudge impale your soul? Or is it maybe time to ask Jesus, what do you want me to do about this? What do you think he would say if you said, as you wish? The third thing is this, that ego gets you in the end. And that's what actually happens to Haman. He starts to feel humiliated. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? He's so blinded by his own ego, he thinks the king's talking about him. And Haman says, well, I think if you want to honor someone, you put them in your robe, king, you sit them on your horse, king, and you have a high official lead them down through the streets. And the king says, that's great, Haman. I want you to do that for Mordecai. And Haman's like, what? Yes, and I want you, Haman, to lead the horse. And so gritting his teeth, Mordecai is dressed in the king's robe, riding on the king's horse, led by Haman through the streets, saying, this is how the king honors someone. And he is so humiliated. He goes home to his family. And what does his wife do? She rubs it in. Since Mordecai, she says, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Thanks, honey. And her prophecy comes true because he quickly goes back to the king for the feast he's been invited to with just the king and Queen Esther, thinking he's going to be honored. He's so blinded by his ego that actually the opposite happens. Then Queen Esther answered the king, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people, the Jews. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. And King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? And she points her finger and says, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen, and King Xerxes ordered Haman to be hung on the pole he set up for Mordecai. we can avoid looking at our own egos. But if we do, we might be tripped up and fall into our own traps. So I ask you, brothers, sisters, search for where the ego trip begins. What's fueling your ego to act this way? What causes you to hold a grudge? What makes you hungry for more? What drives you to ride on the roller coaster of circumstances? Who is driving your life? More than 40 years ago, one of the most frightening drives I ever made was when I took my newborn son home from the hospital. He was so tiny, he didn't even fit in the car seat we had bought for him. My wife had to sit in the back and make sure it didn't choke him. It was so big and he was so small. And I drove up Route 1 from Trenton about 25 miles an hour. You know, I probably should have put my hazard lights on. I was so worried and scared as I was driving home. Do you want to know what's the other most scary day of your life when you have your kid in the car? The day they turn 16 and you give over the keys to them. Now you have to move over into the ride-along seat and let them be in the driver's seat. Up till now, I'd been in charge. I determined the route. I determined the speed. Now I had to let someone else be in charge, in control, and let them drive. It's nice to have Jesus in the ride-along seat. Sometimes you need him. Oh, I'm having a health problem. I'm having a crisis. Jesus, could you ride along with me? But Jesus, I really don't want you to be in the driver's seat. I'm not ready for you to be in charge. And yet, if we really want to live life the way he designed it, we have to give him the keys. That means we have to let him lead. That means my wallet doesn't belong to me anymore. My calendar doesn't belong to me anymore. My mouth doesn't belong to me anymore. I can't use it the way I want. I have to let him lead. So friends, are you going to let him be in the driver's seat? Are you going to give him the keys? Are you going to say, as you wish? Let's pray. I would ask you now, brothers and sisters, to find that place in your heart, in your life, in your ego, where you need to hand over the keys to Christ. Ask his help. Let him lead. Invite him in. Picture him taking that driver's seat. Lord, thank you that you don't leave us to wrestle on our own. We need your help. Please take over. Lead the way. We surrender. We surrender all. We pray this in your name. Amen.